In its first 5 centuries, golf grew slowly as players eager for a match introduced others to the game. By the turn of the century, newspapers and magazines spread the sport across whole continents. In the 30s and 40s, the magic of radio let millions of listeners imagine they were right there on the greens. But it was the advent of television after World War II that helped build the solitary game of golf into a worldwide obsession. Television carpeted our living rooms with the beauty of the fairways and let us follow the flight of a soaring drive from the comfort of our very own sofa. Television offered a close-up look at the personalities that fashioned the game. The steely determination of Ben Hogan, the irrepressible Babe Didrikson Zaharias, the fun-loving Sam Snead, and the undeniable charisma of Arnold Palmer. These great players inspired golf's transition from fairways to airwaves and helped bring millions back to the tee. The Professional Golfers Association of America presents The Complete History of Golf. Volume 3, Into the Television Age.
I have received this afternoon a message from the Japanese government in reply to the message forwarded to that government by the Secretary of State on August 11th. I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration.
Reporters rush out to relay the news to an anxious world and touch off celebrations throughout the country. Washington is jubilant, and in Chicago, more than 1 million sing and dance in the streets in the biggest celebration the Windy City has ever seen. Joy is unconfined.
On August 15, 1945, World War II ended. People around the globe took to the streets to celebrate what would surely be decades of uninterrupted peace. Soviet soldiers watched the 1945 PGA Championship, where the flags of the Allied nations waved in unison. Returning veterans stormed the golf scene. Lloyd Mangrum won the 1946 U.S. Open by 1 stroke after a riveting playoff with Byron Nelson and Vic Gezzi. Lou Warsham and Dr. Kerry Middlecoff would also make their presence known in post-war golf. Great players before the war continued to exert an influence. Gene Sarazen remained a strong contender in his 3rd decade of championship play.
Who said Sarazen was too old to win?
When the British Open was resumed in 1946, Samuel Jackson Snead was there to retake the cup for the Americans, ending a 6-year British run for the trophy. Patty Berg, Babe Didrikson, Zaharias, and Betsy Rawls sparked a growing interest in women's professional golf. But if golf's post-war era belonged to any one person, it was the wee Iceman himself, Ben Hogan. One tournament to buck the tide of modest promotion was the All-American Open. The brainchild of marketing wizard George S. May, the All-American grew out of the Chicago Open, held each year at the historic Tam O'Shanter Club. May built a 4-day golf festival of tournaments supplemented by water shows, music, dancing, hot dogs, and beer.
About 17 years ago, while attending a golf championship, I had to pay $3.75 for the privilege of walking around. I got to thinking about you go to a ballpark, you go to a football game or almost any sport and have a good seat for a lot less money. So I didn't like that. And just immediately after, I was invited to entertain the 3rd Chicago Open. And it worked out so well that I wanted to try out some ideas based upon high prices and admissions. So our first tournament, we charged $1. The purse was $10,000. Now, to make a long story short, after 16 years, we've gotten our purses up. For our first prize is $50,000.
The All-American Open and the World Championship that followed offered all the fun of a carnival, plus the star power of a major championship. The $50,000 first prize in 1956 was nearly 20 times the take on other Pro Tour events. In his ever-present Hawaiian shirts, May innovated the use of grandstands, national television coverage, Pinkerton security, and radio telephones at each green to instantaneously update scores. He even painted fairways with vegetable dye for a lush appearance. Although May's tournaments attracted the game's top players, some complained when he insisted they wear numbers for the benefit of spectators. Yet, even if he was more closely linked to P.T. Barnum than Bobby Jones, George May helped popularize the sport and foreshadowed the promotion explosion which would soon become a permanent part of the game. The Second Great Triumvirate of Nelson, Hogan, and Snead ruled the golf world for 18 incredible years. From Nelson's Masters victory in 1937 through Snead's Masters win in 1954, the Triumvirate would capture 21 out of the 54 major golf championships and set the pace for a generation of golf enthusiasts. Each man was an artist on the links, indelibly etching the game with his own dramatic style. From his early days as a caddy at Glen Garden Country Club, Ben Hogan had to work twice as hard to compensate for his small stature. He seemed to be always one step behind his boyhood friend, Byron Nelson.
In Glen Garden, when it became about 16 years old, the members gave Ben Hogan and myself an honorary junior membership, so we did get to play whenever we wanted to there.
Ben Hogan joined the tour in 1931, but a constant hook plagued him at every turn. He married Valerie, his childhood sweetheart, and the couple scrimped and saved through the lean times. Hogan went broke twice and even considered giving up the game. It took 8 long years before he actually won a tournament. Yet he gradually began to emerge from Byron Nelson's shadow. By 1940, he had adjusted his swing enough to become the tour's top money winner for 3 years in a row. Yet Hogan had never won a major tournament. Sam Snead, by contrast, had won the 42 Masters and was raking in extra dollars through well-publicized golf exhibitions around the country. Hogan's mechanical style seemed to be less marketable than the sinewy swing and backwoods charm of Slammin' Sammy Snead. After returning from the Army Air Corps in 1945, Ben Hogan mapped out his mastery of the tour. The hook was gone, and his robotic accuracy was increasing. Ben Hogan earned a 4th year as leading money winner, but major tournaments still seemed elusive. In 1946, Ben Hogan counted 13 tournament victories, including his first major, the PGA Championship. That same year, Sam Snead brought the revived British Open trophy back to America. By the end of the year, Byron Nelson virtually retired from competitive golf. All 3 men were 34 years old. In 1948, the man for whom practice was practically a religion finally achieved the perfect mix of accuracy and distance. Hogan took his first national title with a record 276 at the Riviera Country Club. He then went on to beat Mike Ternessa 7-6 for his second PGA championship. When 1948 wound to a close, Hogan topped the leading money list for the 5th time in 8 years. By 1949, Ben Hogan appeared to be hurtling toward golf immortality. Instead, he collided head-on with disaster. On February 2nd, 1949, Ben and Valerie Hogan were driving along a 2-lane highway just outside of Van Horn, Texas. With the Phoenix Open behind him, Ben was looking forward to a break from the rigors of the tour. He explained to a reporter from Time magazine that he needed the rest because he wanted to die an old man, not a young man. Now, on this foggy morning, a truck was approaching on the left-hand lane. A concrete barrier hugged the embankment on his right. And suddenly, a Greyhound bus appeared out of nowhere. Only finely tuned reflexes helped him throw himself over his wife in the split second before impact. Valerie escaped serious injury, but Ben's body was mangled and crushed as the bus pushed the car's steering wheel into his shoulder and the engine itself up into his hip. When an ambulance finally arrived an hour and a half later, the critically injured golfer was shuttled a grueling 150 miles to a hospital in El Paso. The damage was extensive. Broken ribs, fractured collarbone, fractured pelvis, broken ankle, massive contusions, and to complicate matters, blood clots coursed slowly through his legs and lower body. When a blood clot moved into his lung, doctors warned Valerie that her husband's chances of survival were slim. The Associated Press readied his obituary. After a blood vessel in his heart was tied off, Ben Hogan weighed only 95 pounds.
I can see a picture of him still on page 1 of the New York Times of Hogan being carried in a stretcher into the hospital. It was doubted that he would ever walk again, much less play golf.
Yet not even medical science could adequately judge the tremendous determination of Ben Hogan. Professional golf's first lady, Patty Berg, had a memorable start on her way to the Hall of Fame.
I was playing in the city championship of Minneapolis, and we qualified, and I had 122, and she had 121, so they put us in the last flight. And I remember the first hole wasn't a very long hole, and what happened is I took a 7, I remember. It was only a short par 4, and she had a 6. Anyway, she beat me on that hole, and I had this little caddy, and I said, you know, now if I win, I'll certainly give you a bonus, because I think you're terrific. And then the third hole, I topped it in the water, and this caddy said, boy, this bag's getting heavy. Then she finally hit a kind of a shank, but it got on the green, and I went in the water, and finally, I said, well, I guess this is your hole, so I was 3 down, and I said to my caddy, well, I'm not playing my usual game today. Well, he said, well, what game do you usually play? So anyway, when it went to the 5th hole, then I started to hit it off the toe of the club and hit it all over the place, so I lost that. And so I said, you know, I love golf, and I want to play golf in the worst way. And he said, I think you've already made it. So the 8th hole, I hit my best drive, but it went over to the right and hit off of a kind of a bunker and flew into some deep rough. We couldn't find a ball. And I said to him, why didn't you watch where it was going? Well, he said, you know, he said, it usually doesn't go anyplace. And he took me kind of by surprise. In the 9th hole, I had a chance to tie the hole. Had a 5-footer, and he told me just where to putt and everything. But I missed that, and so I was 9 down. And he said, boy, he said, this is murder. So I lost, I guess, 10-9. And when I got home, my dad said, well, didn't you do anything right? I said, yeah, I paid the caddy, and I had a great caddy.
Following that defeat, Patty made herself a promise.
As I was walking back to the clubhouse, I said to myself, I'm going to spend the next 365 days learning to play this game of golf and try to do better. Maybe get up to the 5th flight and not shoot 122. 365 days later, I was medalist with 79, and I went on to win the Minneapolis City Championship. That was 365 days on one endeavor. Now, that's a long time to be on one endeavor, but I want you to know that was worth every freckle on my face.
The fiery young golfer set out to make her name in women's golf. The following year, 1935, she won the Minnesota State Championship. and got to the final match in the U.S. Women's Amateur Championship against five-time champion Glenna Colette Vare.
And when I'd watch her play, and when I watched her play that day that we played that match, I could just see how great a player she was. And when she defeated me, she won the National Women's Championship, or the USGA Amateur, for the 6th time, which is still a record today.
Yet Patty Berg had staked her claim and so impressed the golf world that she was named to the 1936 and 1938 Curtis Cup teams. When Patty charged out to the tee in 1938, there was no stopping her. She won 9 championships, including her 2nd successive title holders competition. She was honored as the Associated Press Woman Athlete of the Year. She collected the top prize in the 1938 Women's Amateur Championship, defeating Estelle Lawson Page Jr., 6-5. When Patty turned pro in 1940, there were only 3 money tournaments for women professionals. The total purse for all 3 events was only $500. Wilson Sporting Goods signed Patty as their official spokeswoman. It looked as though things were going her way. Then on December 8, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor was attacked, Patty was injured in a car crash and suffered a broken knee. After a painful 18 months of recuperation, she won her 2nd Western Open and again would be named Woman Athlete of the Year in 1943. Patty joined the Marine Reserves in World War II, but her golfing career was far from over. The void left by Ben Hogan's accident brought other golfers to the forefront: Lou Warsham, Vic Gezzi, and Dr. Kerry Middlecoff. Middlecoff was an Army dentist who abandoned his spit sink for a professional golf career in 1947.
Dr. Middlecoff and the dentist. Of course, this is the first time I played with a dentist. I understand that when he gets on the green to putt, he looks at the hole and says, "Open a little wider, please."
2 years earlier, the tall amateur from Tennessee had beaten Hogan and Denny Shute to take the 1945 North-South Open. His game was marked by exceptional putting and long drives blasted out with a distinctive grunt. Middlecoff's temper frequently added inconsistency to his game. Yet his bold play was enough to capture national opens in 1949 and 1956. Sam Snead kept one eye on the ball and another on the prize money as he won 81 official victories over 5 decades of competitive golf. However, life was different when he started on the tour.
We had more fun. And very seldom, the guy that won was leading the first day, he'd get drunk that night. He said, "Can't do any better than that."
Against the background of that rough and tumble tour, Sam developed the fundamentals of his golden swing.
I came up the hard way. I had to learn what I know by myself, nobody to teach me. I tried to copy everybody I saw. Well, I could copy it pretty well, but then I could hit 4 or 5 balls and then didn't go quite as good, so I'd go back to old swing. Then I decided I'd try to make my swing as simple as I could make it, where I had no little doodads and certain movements and certain cock of the wrist and uncocking the wrist, but the fellows with those things, when they start to screw getting a little bit tighter, well, then they couldn't concentrate on that and trying to put it where they wanted. You should play with feel. Golf is rhythm and timing. I try to teach that ever since I've been a pro to people. I said, look, this one fellow, I said, "You can't hit the ball over that mountain." And he says, "Well, I'm trying." And finally, I got to him. I said, "You know, the old-timey pros used to teach by waltz time, la, 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 boom." Well, he said, "I ought to know something about that." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I'm a professional dancer." He had a 5-iron in his hand. Side's going further than the ball. I said, "Can you swing that?" And it had a pretty good swing. I said, "Can you swing that club in waltz time?" "Yeah." You never saw so many beautiful shots in your life.
Sam took his swing on the road in the middle 30s and started his winning ways. After finishing second to Paul Runyon in the 1938 PGA, Sam got another crack at the elusive major in 1940. In the final, he was facing Byron Nelson. He led for a while after the 32nd hole.
Then he hole a big putt at 16, and another one at 70. The ball fell in the hole, below the hole fell in.
And it all came down to the 36th hole.
And he beat me one down. So, well, this fellow says he beat me.
Byron Nelson would win his first PGA championship, and 2 years later, Sam almost missed another chance.
I was in line in Washington, just waiting to take one step forward to be inducted into service. And there was a little commotion there, and so I broke rank and went around. There was 2 or 3 guys that had those caps with the fried eggs on the bill. And I said, hey, what's the chances of me not being inducted this week? PGA's next week, and I'd like to play, and it's hard telling when we'll play again. He said, what does it mean to you? I said, 2,000 if I win and 2,000 from Wilson Sporting Goods. He said, go call your draft board and tell them that you've had your physical. And you'd like to play in the PGA, that you'll go in service on the following Monday. I burnt the carpet up going down the hall to get to a phone. I called them, and they said, okay. And I worked my way up till I got to Nisa. He had beaten Hogan and Nelson, but I thought, well, they bound to have taken a lot out of him. And just the idea of playing those two, he was drained, I thought. But it was tough. But I enjoyed that. I think I enjoyed that more than any other tournament that I won.
Sam Snead won the PGA Championship twice more in 1949 and 1951. The Masters tournament was another sweet story for Sam.
And I guess I've played more Masters than anybody, 44. That's a lot of time playing in tournament. But I should have won it a whole lot more times than just 3. Those 4 or 5 footers got to me pretty good.
Snead would prove himself a winner on both sides of the Atlantic.
I won the British Open 46. It cost me $2,000 to go over there and play in it. I won 600. I didn't go back and defend my title, I tell you that.
But it was the U.S. Open that kept skipping away. In 1937, he finished his round with a solid lead. Ralph Gouldall was still on the course when people started congratulating Sam on his victory.
One of the networks, which will go nameless, which did not have the radio rights for the Open Championship, when Sam finished at Oakland Hills, took him down the road to a sort of a bootleg station and interviewed him, thinking he had won the Open. Well, he hadn't.
Indeed, he hadn't, and for Snead, this would become a long-running story. In 1939, he played in the U.S. Open and carved out another chance to win. Coming down to the final hole, Snead thought he needed a birdie on 18 to win. He tried for the birdie, played aggressively, and wound up with a triple bogey instead. Later, he would find that a simple bogey would have won him the title. In the 1947 U.S. Open, Snead and Lew Worsham had tied at the end of the regulation 4 rounds. Sam quickly took charge in the 18-hole playoff. But after leading by 2 strokes through 17, Worsham tied him up. Here, just off the green on 18, Worsham pitches. The ball rolls straight for the hole, then lips out. Now it's Snead's turn to putt for the championship. He executes a solid putt that falls 2.5 feet short. The championship is still in the balance as Sam prepares to putt again. But Worsham asked for a measurement. The officials ruled that Sam is away. And after his 2.5-foot putt, he is still away from an Open championship. For the man with more wins than any other golfer on the American Tour, it is a notable exception. Will he ever learn to live with the frustration?
I lie in bed sometimes to think about it. I could have won easily 15 U.S. Opens.
Win or lose, the fans always love to watch Sam Snead with his bag full of funny stories, his smooth swing, and his unequaled record of tournament victories over the decades. Following Bobby Jones' spectacular Grand Slam, the National Amateur slowly began to fade as a major tournament. Most talented players spent a few years in the amateur ranks, then turned professional. By the late 30s, the Masters and the PGA Championship took the place of the U.S. and British amateurs in the modern Grand Slam.
But I think the adjustment from the professional being on the bottom to the professional being on the top, and the amateur taking his normal place of playing the game as a game, is a very interesting part of the evolution of golf.
Mildred Didrikson from Beaumont, Texas, took up golf after winning her gold medals in the 1932 Olympics. Nicknamed Babe for her baseball skills, she had also mastered basketball, swimming, skating, tennis, tap dancing, and earned national amateur awards for 8 different track and field events. She was the ultimate athlete, and when she turned her skills toward golf, there was nothing that could hold her back.
I was the first one to take her out because Grandin Rice and Paul Gallico called me up and they asked me, there was a girl out in Los Angeles that's got a bunch of gold medals in the Olympics, and she's been playing golf on a public course, and she wants to go on a 30-day tour with you. Well, I said, what are you going to do? She said, well, we'll arrange the tour for you. So I went out, took my wife with me, had to have a chaperone with her. That was the rule in those days. And they had us booked 30 straight days. And then after that, she went by herself. She spent more time practicing than Ben Hogan. And she was a great player. Oh, she could hit the ball a ton. And I'll never forget, when I took Babe Didrikson on a tour, the final match was in Chicago. It was against Horton Smith and Joyce Weathered. And I had Babe Didrikson and myself, and we had hired, Wilson Company had hired her to play Wilson clubs, and she was playing very good. So when she got to Chicago at Oak Park, and we had this great match, they had to stop the gallery from coming in, close the gates. The night before, she went out with the Goldsmith boys that owned McGregor at that time. And they gave her $1,000 to play Goldsmith clubs the next day. And she played terrible. Oh, she was about 90. And Joyce Weather had coasted around in 71, and they beat us terribly. That was the end of that episode.
In 1935, she won the Texas Women's Invitational. Some were turned off by her earthy style and put pressure on the USGA to revoke her amateur status in golf because she had earned money playing baseball and basketball. Friends created the Women's Texas Open so Babe could compete there. It would be 1943 before she would regain her amateur status. Babe was exuberant when performing on the golf course. When she talked about hitching up her girdle to make a shot, the gallery roared and the press loved her. Top amateur Polly Riley remembers the Babe in action.
It was a match play tournament. We had an 18-hole qualifying round, and then we played match play. And I happened to be playing with Babe one year in the qualifying round, and Babe had a bad round, and she shot something like an 82 or an 83, which was quite bad for her on that course, particularly. And a young reporter from the local paper who came up to her and said, well, Mrs. Zaharias, he'd never seen her, and he was in total awe. And he said, well, Mrs. Zaharias, tell me, how did you shoot your 82 today? And she said, well, I'll tell you, son. Says, this golf course doesn't have but 8 bleeping trees on it, and I hit 20. And that was a typical Babe, you know.
Babe had married 300-pound wrestler-promoter George Zaharias in 1938. Another experience for 6-time Curtis Cup team member Polly Riley involved the Babe in the Texas Open.
The most thrilling had to be when I won a Texas Open by beating Babe Didrikson Zaharias in the final at Rivercrest. I played very, very well, and Babe was not having a good day. And there's an interesting story about the reporting of that the outcome of that match to George Zaharias, Babe's husband. He was in New York having dinner at Toots Shores, and the day of the final, and he mentioned at dinner, I wonder how Babe came out today. And she's playing Polly Riley in the Texas Open final. Toots says, I'll go find out. He went to the phone and called one of his media friends and asked. Toots knew nothing about golf. I asked how it came out. He got the report and he came back and he said, well, George, Babe lost, but it was very close. It was 10-9. And George, of course, just almost choked Toots' shoulder. He was so upset he couldn't stand it.
Although Babe had regained her amateur status in 1943, women's amateur golf had been suspended during the war. So it was not until 1946 that Babe would re-enter the amateur competition. Her victories in the 1946 U.S. Amateur and the 1947 British Amateur were the bookends for a succession of victories in the top tournaments of the period. She returned pro again in 1947. Meanwhile, a determined amateur out of Atlanta began to attract national attention. Louise Suggs was quickly compared to Ben Hogan in the way she could motorize her slight frame to blast the ball straight down the fairways. Her short game was even more impressive. Louise Suggs' first big win came in the 1946 Western Open, when she had to defeat Babe Zaharias and Patty Berg for the title. Suggs became the second American to win the British Ladies Amateur title in 1948. There were, however, few tournaments and very little prize money for the women professionals of the day. Patty Berg had returned to her winning ways with 2 majors in 1948, but the women golfers had limited success expanding opportunities for competitive play. The only alternative was to organize.
Hope Cygnus started the Women's Professional Golf Association. She had Betty Hicks as president, Alan Griffin as vice president, and she was secretary and treasurer herself. And Hope was to get out and promote it and to get sponsors. Now, you have to give a lot of credit to Hope Cygnus and to Betty Hicks and to Alan Griffin, because they started it with the Women's Professional Golf Association. But what happened then, after a few years, they finally gave up. They gave up in 1948, which was too bad because they had great ideas and they had great vision, but they just could not sell it, evidently, to the public. The public wasn't ready for it yet, evidently.
Fred Corcoran prompted his client, Babe Zaharias, to join with Patty Berg, Louise Suggs, and other top women professionals to form the Ladies Professional Golf Association. With help from the Wilson Sporting Goods Company, Babe's popularity, and the enthusiasm of newly elected President Patty Berg, the LPGA was formally launched in 1950.
Fred said, I think we ought to change the name from Women's Professional Golf Association to the LPGA. And he said, the reason for it is he said, ladies sounds better than women. And the second thing he said, we have to get some publicity. So he said, we'll change the name. And so then Fred became our tournament director. And our goal was, in a nutshell, to get more exposure, more players turning professional, more tournaments, more sponsors, more publicity, just get women's professional golf off the ground.
And get off the ground it did, as emerging stars like Betty Jamieson, Allison Marlene Bauer, Marilyn Smith, and a number of other top women golfers helped the Ladies Professional Golf Association earn national attention. The first official LPGA tournament was the Tampa Open, and it was won by an amateur.
The first round, when I came to the 18th hole, which was a par 5, needing a par for a 68, and I made 8. And thought, well, I've blown everything to do with the tournament. I've blown right here. But I had a very fortunate 4 rounds there in that was the only score that I had above 5 in the tournament.
Although America was clearly the dominant power in golf, other countries were producing impressive players. Henry Cotton won his third British Open in 1948. And the new power on the European golf scene was a South African named Arthur Darcy Locke. Bobby Locke, as he was more commonly known, had captured national championships from Holland to New Zealand. In 1947, he traveled to America and won 6 out of 13 events on the professional tour, earning more money that year than either Ben Hogan or Sam Snead.
Bobby Locke, he was the best putter I ever saw. I mean, it didn't make any difference what kind of greens he putted on. I mean, he was just outstanding. Hooked everything, even hooked the putter. Hooked his wedge, even.
Locke's 14 tour victories came at a time when American players were no longer used to seeing foreign players win on their greens. In 1949, the PGA banned Bobby Locke from the tour, claiming he had backed out on commitments to compete in PGA events. Locke decided to concentrate on Europe. He won the British Open in 1949, 1950, and again in 1952. After capturing his 4th British Open crown, Bobby Locke retired from competitive golf with more than 80 victories across the globe. Another powerhouse player was Peter Thomson, who went from the land down under to the top of the sport.
Peter Thomson was a great Australian player. He won the Open 5 times. He won it here at Royal Birkdale. And I think he had the most simple method I've ever seen. When he addressed the ball, there didn't look anywhere in the world that he could hit a bad shot. It was so simple, his method, and so effective. Beautiful player.
Starting in 1954, Thomson won 3 British Open championships in a row. In 1957, he came in second to Bobby Locke. Then he retook the crown in 1958 and added a 5th title in 1965, leaving him 1 short of Harry Vardon's record 6 British Open championships.
Peter helped me a lot, just giving me the belief that I could do it, basically, and giving me something to strive for, because he was, the first time he won a British Open was there at Birkdale, and the last one also he won was at Birkdale, and I had some great positive thoughts going all week because of that.
Thompson's only major American championship was a 1984 seniors title. Yet his skill on the greens helped Australia take its place among the premier nations of golf. As the second half of the 20th century began, it was obvious that humanity had learned little from the bloodshed of the previous decades. Only 1 year after World War II, China, Greece, and Vietnam were each plunged into civil war. The same year, the United Nations headquarters opened in New York. UN peacekeeping forces were fighting in Korea. The growing Cold War was chilling the hearts and minds of the world. The golf course in the 50s was a far gentler battlefield. World War II had kick-started the American industrial machine, and peacetime prosperity left people with more money and plenty of leisure time. The call of the Sun Belt and exodus to the suburbs placed more people in areas large enough for courses to be built. Nearly 5 million Americans now vied for tee times on the nation's 5,000 courses. Many in the golf world had written off Ben Hogan, although he served as non-playing captain of the 1949 Ryder Cup team. Doctors insisted his legs could no longer stand up to a round of golf.
A few days before the Open entries closed that year of '49, he sent a letter to the United States Golf Association, private and confidential, and enclosed his entry for the 1949 Open, saying that he hadn't walked much. He certainly hadn't swung a golf club, but sometimes miracles happen, and he wanted to have his entry in case a miracle did happen in his case. And please, said he, don't announce this. I want it to be a surprise if I can play. Well, he didn't play. But the point of the story for me was, he was this man who thought miracles still could happen.
Hogan's first attempt at a miracle was the 1950 Los Angeles Open, and 9,000 fans came to watch the battle with rival Sam Snead. With his legs wrapped tightly in elastic bandages, Hogan shot a 73 on the first round and a 69 in the second, third, and fourth. Snead was equally brilliant and tied for a playoff. even though a fan fell out of a tree while he was lining up a 15-foot putt on the 18th green.
I was over the ball, just getting ready to stroke, and a fellow falls over a tree right behind her, and crash it went. And the people started laughing and clapping. I turned around, and all his head was just stuck out of the bush, and he said, "I'm all right, I'm all right."
Although Snead eventually took the playoff, the pain-racked Hogan had proven to the world he was back in contention.
He didn't lose. His legs simply were not strong enough to carry his heart around.
Hogan's next attempt was at the 1950 U.S. Open at Marion. The press hovered, eager to get a shot of either his victory or his collapse. Hogan's caddy had to take the ball out of the cup because the pain of bending over was too great. Leg bandages, hot baths between rounds, plus superhuman suppression of cramps and nausea helped Hogan rise from 5th place to tie for the lead with Lloyd Mangrum and George Fazio. After one night of rest, Hogan came back to shoot a playoff round in '69 to win his second Open title. An enthusiastic fan had to be restrained as the crowd went wild. Only 16 months after his near brush with death, Ben Hogan was named the PGA Player of the Year. The great rivalry between Hogan and Snead continued in 1951. Hogan took his 3rd U.S. Open and first Masters title, while Snead earned his 3rd PGA crown. In '52, Snead won his 2nd Masters, while Hogan was shut out in championship play. But 1953 was the year that Ben Hogan established himself as the Iron Man of golf. In 1953, Snead and Hogan both turned 41. At an age when other men's skills diminish, these two golfing greats were playing better than ever. Hogan began at Augusta National with a blistering 274, 5 under the previous Masters record. 2 more tournament victories, and it was on to the Oakmont Country Club for the National Open. Oakmont had been criticized for its sprawling layout and difficult design. Still, Hogan marched over it with a 5-under par 283. It would be Sam Snead's 4th time as runner-up in the U.S. Open. Ben Hogan had now won 2 legs in the modern Grand Slam. He had also won every major at least twice, except the British Open, which he had never entered. In 1953, he decided it was time to compete in the domain of Tom Morris and Harry Vardon.
All through that time, he had to make all this exercise and develop a new, I guess, blood vessels or whatever in his legs. And he got to the point where I think he was in the best physical shape ever.
The 1953 British Open was held in Carnoustie. Many felt the old Scottish links and smaller British ball would frustrate the Americans. Hogan was indeed frustrated. At one point, he told the British press he would send his lawnmower from Texas so they could take proper care of the course. The wee Iceman, as they called him, quickly began to lose favor with the Scottish locals. Yet once Hogan began to play, the crowd, the course, and the world were his. His total of 282 was 8 strokes lower than the previous Carnoustie record. The British press hailed him as the greatest golfer of the era. Like Bobby Jones after his 1930 Grand Slam, Ben Hogan was honored with a ticker-tape parade in New York. If the PGA Championship had not been scheduled around the time of the British Open, Hogan might well have taken all 4 modern majors. As it was, he became the only player to capture golf's Triple Crown, or 3 modern majors in the same year. The fact that he did it only 4 years after his near-fatal car crash assured Ben Hogan a place of honor in golf's illustrious history. One of golf's most influential personalities during the 1950s was actually an amateur, and one with a pretty good day job at that. During World War II, one of the most popular military figures was Dwight David Eisenhower. As Supreme Commander of Allied forces, he molded the armies of many nations into a cohesive fighting force. Ultimate victory in his own personal diplomacy won him the gratitude of the free world. His rise to power had been meteoric, and demand for him to enter political office was, in the end, irresistible. Eisenhower became the 34th President of the United States in 1953. He was a family man, warrior, and statesman, all rolled into one. And when the President picked up a golf club, it seemed as American as apple pie.
I don't know that I had met many people that appreciated the game any more than he did. He was a very ardent fan, he was a participant, and he really enjoyed the things that went along with the game of golf.
Here, the President teaches little David Eisenhower the fundamentals at the presidential retreat at Camp David. Dwight Eisenhower was not the first presidential golf addict, although he was one of the most enthusiastic. Back in 1908, President William Howard Taft took to the links. So did President Warren G. Harding. Calvin Coolidge could also be seen in the company of noted golfers. This rare photo shows a young Franklin Delano Roosevelt executing a classic golf swing. Years after this picture was taken, Roosevelt would be paralyzed with polio and forced to lead the nation from the confines of a wheelchair. But it was Dwight David Eisenhower who embodied the nation's fascination with the sport. He installed a pitching green behind the White House and was a frequent visitor to the Newport Country Club. Ike enjoyed playing with celebrities and golfing greats.
Presented to General Dwight D. Eisenhower in recognition of his valued contribution to the ancient and honorable game of golf and in appreciation of his equally valued contribution to the Desert Classic. It's signed by all the champions of golf: Doug Sanders, our Desert Classic champions, Jack Nicklaus, Tommy Jacobs, Arnold Palmer, Billy Casper, Doug Sanders, and Tom Neporty, and also the Professional Golfers Association of America. You know, we can't say enough, but we say we're grateful and we're so thrilled that you're here again. Thank you very much.
Bob, you made it impossible for me to talk. I'm not usually at a loss for words, but I thank from my heart all of these men, this club, and particularly you.
During the 50s, millions of young boys grew up wanting to be president. Thanks to Ike, this meant they also began taking an interest in golf.
I think he was one of the greatest people I have ever met, and I consider that one of the great friendships I had in my lifetime.
The USGA, powered by the strong arm of President Theodore Havemeyer, took an early stand on the race issue in golf. When John Shippen and Shinnecock Indian Oscar Bunn tried to play in the 1896 U.S. Open, many white players threatened to quit.
John Shippen was definitely the first black American to play in the United States Open. He might, in fact, have been the first American-born golf professional, period. And, of course, the irony was not lost on Havemeyer that the only two people born in America were being protested that they couldn't play in what was then the American Open. And he stated, to his unending credit, as far as I'm concerned, to these pros that it was going to be played the next day. If they played just with Bunn and Shippen, it was going to be contested.
The white players relented, and Shippen eventually placed fifth in the national championship. Aside from the U.S. Open, few tournaments accepted players of color. These rare 1927 images show a tournament at Shady Rest, one of the first black-owned country clubs. In 1928, black players formed the United Golf Association, similar in spirit to the Negro League in baseball.
Every Afro-American golfer that is on the PGA Tour today, the LPGA or the Seniors Tour, use the UGA as its training ground, as its opportunity to meet the requirements to play on the PGA Tour.
The small number of tournaments open to non-white golfers was dubbed the Peanut Circuit.
4 or 5 of us would get in an automobile and go around the country, sharing gas and staying pretty much in hotels and things that we could afford, whereby we'd get a room and get 4 of us in there, take the box springs off the bed and lay them on the floor and things of that nature, you know, and really save some money.
The most famous black golfer of the pre-war years was, oddly enough, the undisputed champion of the world. Joe Louis, the heavyweight boxer, was a true golf fanatic. Unfortunately, the brown bomber was a far better fighter than a golfer, and he often dropped thousands of hard-won dollars in golf bets. In the late 40s, a young golfer named Charlie Sifford ran a modest pro shop out of the trunk of his car. By the 1950s, he would be the only approved black player to compete in PGA events. He was not allowed full membership, but his special status let him test his skills against the top white golfers. Sifford triumphed in the 1957 Long Beach Open, the first African-American to win an official PGA event. Yet it wasn't until 1959 the PGA formally removed the race barrier from its constitution. Sifford sometimes encountered physical and verbal abuse when playing tournaments in the South. Still, his courage and determination helped change the complexion of the game.
It doesn't matter who you are, white, black, blue, or brown. The game of golf doesn't favor anyone.
Bing Crosby and Bob Hope continued to promote golf as a sport that could be both fun and addicting. During the war years, they sponsored exhibitions to raise money for war bonds and were responsible for bringing in over $1 million for the war effort. During peacetime, gate proceeds often went to charitable causes. In 1937, Bing Crosby invited 136 golf professionals and celebrity amateurs to an informal tournament and clam bake at the Rancho Santa Fe Country Club in San Diego, California. The professional winner was Sam Snead. The star-studded event rapidly became one of the sport's most popular events. Crosby continued to sponsor the annual party until 1947, when the Bing Crosby National Pro-Am was moved to Pebble Beach. Not to be outdone by his friend and movie partner, Bob Hope became associated with the Palm Springs Golf Classic in 1965. Today, the Bob Hope Desert Classic has become an equally important event on the tour. Following these examples, golf and charity became slowly intertwined. The PGA-sponsored National Golf Day allowed average players across the nation an opportunity to beat the target score of a noted professional. The first National Golf Day was held in 1952. And more than 87,000 golfers across the country tried to match or beat Ben Hogan's pace-setting score, with the proceeds going to charity. Local station KSD-TV in St. Louis broadcast the first televised U.S. Open in 1947. Local audiences thrilled to see Lou Warsham's single-stroke triumph over Sam Snead. The first golf tournament broadcast coast to coast was George May's 1953 World Championship of Golf. Once again, Lou Warsham was the star as he shot an amazing 104-yard wedge shot for an eagle on the par 4 18th hole. Jimmy DeMeritt described the action like this. He's hit it fat. It'll probably be short. He just hit the front edge of the green. It's got no chance. It's rolling toward the cup. Well, I'll be damned. In typical George May fashion, Warsham received a record $62,000 for his victory. The ratings soared, and the love affair of golf and television was off to a Cinderella start. When television first focused on golf, the demand for radio coverage plummeted. In later years, radio would again find its niche in the on-the-spot reporting and interviews. Because of the lack of mobility of early television equipment, only the later holes were usually covered. As technology improved and golf audiences grew, directors realized the importance of coverage on all 18 holes. By the late 50s, the networks were broadcasting a tournament a week, yet the public appetite for golf seemed insatiable.
And now, by the flying carpet of television, we take you to Atlanta, Georgia, where you'll meet the only man in golf history to make the famous Grand Slam. The winner of the 4 major golf tournaments in one year, Mr. Robert Tyre Jones, Jr. All set? Come in, Atlanta. Hello, Ken. Bob, how old were you when you felt that you were a pretty good golfer?
Well, I'm not sure that I ever felt that way, but I began to take interest in tournaments, I think when I was 12, 13 years old. I played in the National Amateur first when I was 14.
And how old were you when you won your first tournament?
Well, it took a long time for me to win an important championship. The first one I won was the National Open in 1923 when I was 22.
And from then on, you kept on winning them?
Well, I got my share after that.
Look, Bob, I want to ask you a little secret. How many golf clubs did you break before you finally hit your stride?
Well, when I got old enough to know better, I quit breaking clubs in tournaments. But playing around home when I didn't have to be on my company manners, I must confess that I did get some pleasure out of throwing one every now and then.
As golf changed television, so did television change golf. Stroke play, which allowed the viewing audience a chance to follow the lowest score, fit the medium better than match play, which was harder to follow within a confined broadcast schedule. The time constraints of television was one of the reasons the PGA Championship was changed to stroke play in 1958.
Well, I'm not sure at that time I really comprehended what significance television was going to make in the game of golf. The financial ability of sponsors and tournaments to raise prize money because of television. It was pretty obvious that match play was going to be very difficult to continue. You know, if you get 20,000 people or 30,000 people out to watch one match, it's next to impossible. They just cannot see or enjoy the match with that number of people. And going to stroke play was a decision I'm sure it was very difficult for the PGA to make. But I'm sure everybody now would, as they look back, would say, even though it was difficult, it was a very correct move.
In 1957, Wilson Sporting Goods began a series called All-Star Golf, which featured matches between two golf stars designed specifically for television.
The winner of this first All-Star TV golf match will get a big fat check for $2,000, and the loser is going to get a check for $1,000. I'd also like to point out that the fellow who wins stays in, so whichever one of you fellows wins today will be invited to come back on our next match and play another outstanding golfer.
One of the most popular early broadcasters was Jimmy DeMeritt, who helped introduce loose open shirts and plaid pants as golf fashion. DeMeritt's singing career and quick wit made him comfortable in front of the camera, while his own 44 tournament victories, including 3 Masters, gave him credibility and an impressive knowledge of the game.
We were using black and white cameras from my first tournament in 1958 through 1966. The first color cameras we used were utilized at the 1967 Masters. And what a revelation that was, going from black and white to color. That probably, if there's one major technological breakthrough, it would have to be the advent of color. The other things were just a natural technical progression, the utilization of high-speed and very mobile minicams, radio frequency equipment, wireless equipment. Those things just came along naturally, but the breakthrough between the black and white era and color, I think, really brought golf to the forefront in television.
1962, Shell Oil's Wonderful World of Golf was born, featuring matches at famous courses around the globe.
A match over 18 holes between Jackie Bonvin of Switzerland, 3-time title holder of the Swiss Professional Championship, and for 6 consecutive years a representative on his country's Canada Cup team, and Bobby Nichols of the United States, long driving young star on the PGA circuit, winner of both the St. Petersburg Open and the Houston Classic. To analyze today's match for us, the legendary Gene Sarazen, winner of every major title in golf. I'm George Rogers on the scene here in Cronk, and this is Shell's Wonderful World of Golf. a series of international matches played on the world's most famous golf courses. This week, the Crown Golf Club, Crown-sur-Sierre, Switzerland.
Steel shafts, television coverage, and the compact upright swing heralded the evolution to golf's modern age. Still, some vestiges of the ancient game remained. In 1951, the USGA and the Royal and Ancient joined to proclaim the death penalty for the stymie. Because the stymie was used primarily in match play, and since match play became less fashionable in the television age, the two rule-making entities decreed the banishment of the stymie throughout the golf world. Another of golf's growing pains involved the longer drives made possible by steel-shafted clubs. Hazards designed for hickory clubs were now leapt over in drives made 30 to 60 yards longer by steel's lack of torsion. In 1956, the USGA revised its yardage rules for determining par. For the first time since World War I, traditional course designs and modern playing equipment had made old man par almost irrelevant. The designer most responsible for reestablishing the integrity of par was architect Robert Trent Jones. Jones developed his own independent study program on golf architecture and design while attending Cornell. He believed, as did A.W. Tillinghast, Donald Ross, and Alistair McKenzie before him, that accuracy, not length, should dictate the play of the hole. His designs forced golfers to adopt strategies for each shot. Bunkers were repositioned to trap the errant driver. Greens were built with more difficult rolls and contours. Under Robert Trent Jones, par became challenging once again. Another sign that the modern age had come at last was the widespread introduction of the golf cart. These custom motorized buggies made the game more accessible to the elderly, the infirmed, or anyone tired of walking in the fresh air. Carts were not only fun to drive, they also shaved time off each round by eliminating that long trudge from tee to green. In this way, each player could move through the course more quickly, and more golfers could tee off each day. Golf carts led to the inclusion of specially marked cart paths throughout the course, but their biggest impact was in reducing the need for a caddy. Ever since Mary, Queen of Scots, graced the links 500 years earlier, caddies had been an important, though not always respected, part of the game. In the 17th century, a golfer clubbed his caddy to death for making sarcastic comments. The judge, who was also a golfer, released the man with only a small fine. As the centuries passed, child labor laws were often grudgingly complied with by caddy masters. Caddies helped the golfer play a better game by offering advice on club selection and course strategy. Many players, however, viewed caddies as simply a means of transporting a heavy bag of clubs over a 6,000-yard course. In this regard, golf carts were both faster and cheaper. Interestingly enough, it was usually the professionals and better players who preferred to employ caddies.
Come over here a minute. Chuck, I want you to meet Ben Hogan. Hello, Chuck. How are you? How are you hitting him? You know, Ben's the only fellow ever to win the Triple Crown, the Western Open, the National Open, and the National PGA Championships. Just a great player. This Chick Evans here. Chick's the first amateur to win the National Amateur and the National Open. He's also the founder of the Evans Scholar Foundation. And I guess you know my boy here. Now look, for a novelty today, let's confine this to 18 holes. Dad, don't dig any extra ones.
I don't want any small talk. Just stand there and learn something. This
Show
is
you
a
how-
modern style, you know.
Show you how much I think of you. I'm going to give you the honor.
I'll take it. It's the only thing you've ever given me.
Son, pick up that ball and follow me.
Famous players even set up special programs to help relieve the plight of the caddies. Thousands of caddies have been helped through college with scholarships from the Francis We Met Caddy Scholarship Fund. After the novelty of the motorized carts wore off, the caddy ranks were again recognized as a fundamental part of the game. As the 1950s wore on, the biggest question in golf was who would succeed Ben Hogan as the next superstar. A number of golfers showed promise. Julius Boros, winner of 2 National Opens and a PGA Championship. 1958 PGA champ Dow Fensterwald. Byron Nelson's protege, Ken Venturi. The fiery-tempered Tommy Bolt. Walker Cup star Frank Stranahan. Jack Burke Jr., who wore both the Masters jacket and the PGA crown in 1956. Doug Ford, another Masters and PGA winner. Dick Mayer with an Open under his belt. Art Wall Jr., the 1959 Masters champion. Or Harvey Ward, arguably the finest amateur in decades. Ward won the 1952 British Amateur crown, then grabbed 2 consecutive U.S. amateur titles in 1955 and 1956, only to be disqualified as an amateur by the USGA the following year. The USGA contended that Ward's employer helped pay his expenses to the tournament. Oddly enough, Ward's boss was Eddie Lowry, who as a 10-year-old caddy helped Francis Ouimet to his astounding 1913 U.S. Open victory over Harry Vardon and Ted Ray. Perhaps the player with the most promise was Gene Littler, a talented amateur out of San Diego, California. Littler's 1953 U.S. amateur victory was followed by a decision to turn pro the following year. His dead-eye drives kept him consistently in the money and a favorite with the galleries. Gene Sarazen, the game's elder statesman, judged Littler to have as smooth a swing as either Bobby Jones or Walter Hagen. Here he is holding the Seagram Cup after winning the 1965 Canadian Open. Yet, despite 29 tour victories, Gene Littler claimed only 1 major championship, the 1961 U.S. Open. The names most frequently seen atop the leaderboard in the early 1950s were Patty Berg and Babe Zaharias. The titanic battles between Berg and Zaharias seemed to overshadow all others. Perhaps the unusual format of the Weather Vane tournament illustrates this intense yet friendly rivalry.
It was really quite a format. You played 36 holes in 4 different areas. 36 in the south, 36 in the east, 36 in the west, 36 in the north. And each tournament was a tournament within itself. And then at the end of the 144 holes that we played, that would determine the champion, the Weather Vane champion for that year. And Babe and I tied after 144 holes. So we had to have a 36-hole playoff.
After 18 playoff holes, the decision was still in doubt.
We tied again. We had 71s. And somebody said, "Are you people just doing this?" And Babe looked at the fellow. And then the next day we played, and I remember that Babe put a ball in the water. And I had birdied, I think, 16. So we came to 18, and I was 2 strokes up. And I bogeyed 18, but Babe parted, so I won by 1 shot. And then Babe gave me that wonderful greeting. She was a great sport. Greatest sense of humor. Very kind, and everybody loved Babe. And Babe loved everybody.
Just as the Nelson, Hogan, and Snead era was drawing to a close, so too the Berg, Zaharias, and Suggs combination in women's golf was beginning to fade. In 1953, Babe Didrikson Zaharias was diagnosed with cancer. The extensive surgery she required made it unlikely that she would ever compete in professional sports again. But like Ben Hogan, the Babe was determined to prove the doctors wrong. The following year, she added 5 more tournament wins. Yet it was her 3rd Women's Open title that would mark her ultimate comeback victory.
I was laying there in room 201 at the Hotel D Hospital, and these reports were going out about that I never play championship or tournament golf again. And I laid in the bed and I says, please, God, let me play again. And he answered my prayer.
Babe played terrific. I think she won by about 12 shots. She played magnificent. And remember, they were still playing 36 holes on the last day of the Open. They were finishing their tournament up on a Saturday. And here's a lady that had just been operated on a few months ago for cancer. It was a great victory.
Mildred Didrikson Zaharias, who had been called the greatest woman athlete of the 20th century, died on September the 27th, 1956. She left a special thought with her friend Patty Berg.
And she said to me, you know, Pat, watching the sunset and knowing who to thank. That's what she said. She was a very, very human, down-to-earth, wonderful lady.
After Babe died, life on the LPGA Tour changed. Patty Berg and Louise Suggs continued to win. Betsy Rawls and Mickey Wright were rapidly becoming household names. One of Mickey's early tournaments was the 1954 Women's Open, where she was paired with the Babe and finished fourth as low amateur. The woman with the perfect swing turned pro in 1955 and matched Betsy Rawls' record with 4 Women's Open championships, winning in 58, 59, 61, and 64, along with LPGA titles in 58, 60, 61, and 63. Finishing up a brilliant career with 82 victories, her consistent style dazzled both fans and competitors.
The only reason I guess maybe I remember Mickey so well is because I think of her as the greatest golfer I've ever seen, and I thought she always, you know, and sometimes I would beat her, but most of the time I lost. But I never felt bad about it. I thought, well, I'm losing to the best in the world.
On her way to the Hall of Fame, Mickey Wright set a new women's record, 62 for an 18-hole tournament round. She was named the Associated Press Athlete of the Year in both 1963 and 1964. Betsy Rawls, meanwhile, won 8 major championships over her career. In 1959, she took 10 titles on the Women's Tour and won the Vare Trophy. Along with Wright and Rawls, other women fought for position atop the leaderboard. Kathy Cornelius, Marilyn Smith, Mary Mills, Marilena Falk, Judy Rankin. Sandra Haney suffered from arthritis through much of her career while posting 42 victories, which included the LPGA Championship and the U.S. Women's Open in the same year. In the 60s, the classic battle shifted to Kathy Whitworth and Carol Mann. Carol had a career 38 victories as a pro. In 1968, she had 23 rounds in the 60s. She often found herself matched against Kathy for tournament titles.
I'll never forget in Baltimore, my hometown, the most memorable match I can recall with Kathy. And on the front 9, the par was 37 on the front 9. She shot 32 and I shot 33. And I mean, it was trade, birdies the whole way. She had a short putt, only a 2-footer for a par at 11, and she missed it. This is the first time this ever happened to me, where I actually didn't like it that my fellow competitor failed in something. I wanted her to keep pushing me. I wanted her performance to be as excellent as it could possibly be, no crack in the armor. I was so disappointed that Kathy Whitworth missed that putt. It looked like a crack in the armor, and I walked through that opening. I ultimately won. But I was very disappointed.
Carol Mann. There were several years there where she and I battled it out a lot. And it seemed like she and I were always winding up being in contention the last day and battling it out.
Kathy Whitworth would win her share of those battles, so many that she would soon earn the title Golfer of the Decade. Both Kathy Whitworth and Carol Mann would continue to pose a threat on the women's pro circuit. However, many others would come along ready to take their measure. Meanwhile, Great Britain was plotting to overthrow the golf tyranny of its former colony. Britain's 1957 Ryder Cup team was led by Welsh star Di Reese, a Ryder Cup veteran for 2 full decades. The Americans had held the trophy since 1935, with winning teams captained by Walter Hagen, Ben Hogan, Sam Snead, Lloyd Mangrum, and Chick Harbert. But Reese planned to change all that. Although the Americans took an early lead, the British team came back with a determination that inspired the hometown gallery. The final score was Britain 7.5, America 4.5. However, the British victory would be short-lived. 2 years later, the Americans took back the cup and retained the championship for the next 26 years. As scientists cast their eyes to the heavens, the golf world anxiously awaited a new star to emerge on the greens. Despite an impressive roster of professionals and amateurs, the true successor to Ben Hogan was destined to be a surprise powerhouse from Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Little Latrobe, the home of America's first professional football game in 1896, was also the birthplace of one of the world's most beloved sports stars, Arnold Palmer. Arnold Palmer took an ancient Scottish game and made it 100% American. He was John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, and every mother's son rolled into one. A Superman who wore his emotions on his sleeve. A bold player and successful entrepreneur who tugged at our heartstrings for the grace with which he accepted defeat. He became Arnold Palmer, the only person who could live up to that name. If you were to ask any 5 people who have never watched a golf match to name a famous golfer, it's likely they would all say Arnold Palmer. Fans who have never seen him in his prime will dash across the fairways to watch Arnold play a hole. And even his greatest rivals will admit that he is still genuinely a very nice guy. Arnold Palmer's father, Milfred Deacon Palmer, was the golf pro and ground superintendent at the Latrobe Country Club.
Golf has been a part of my life from the day that I was a child. My father was a golf professional. I was raised on a golf course, and we really never knew anything but golf in the early days of my life.
By age 7, Arnold had broken 100 on the 18-hole course.
I discovered Arnold Palmer playing in a junior tournament. I was working at the Pittsburgh Press, and he was from Latrobe, which is up the road. And I find this guy hitting golf balls after he lost in the first round of a junior tournament, which he was favored to win by everybody. And he stood and he said, "Nobody's ever going to beat me in the first round again." And we developed a friendship which has lasted all through the years.
Arnold attended Wake Forest University on a golf scholarship, and with roommate Buddy Worsham propelled the Wake Forest golf team into the collegiate stratosphere. When Worsham was killed in a car accident, Palmer was devastated. He dropped out of Wake Forest and joined the Coast Guard. While stationed in Cleveland, he began to play golf again and managed to win a number of tournaments. In 1954, Palmer won the U.S. amateur title. He was 24 years old. That same year, Sam Snead won his third Masters at the age of 42. The amateur title gave Palmer the confidence he needed to try his luck as a pro. He placed a respectable 10th in the Masters and then went on to take the Canadian Open by storm. It was his first professional victory.
I had played the tour for almost a year, trying to get myself cranked into the professional game, and felt very fortunate to win the Canadian Open and to shoot the scores that I shot. That's the lowest 4 rounds I've shot in my entire career, and it remains the 4 lowest rounds.
In 1958, Arnold Palmer took another shot at the Masters in Augusta. Palmer was tied with Sam Snead for the low score. In the final round, Snead fell off the pace, and Ken Venturi pursued Palmer for the lead. A successful dispute with an official on the water-soaked 12th hole, followed by an eagle on the 13th, gave Palmer the lead and his first of 4 Masters titles. Unlike many golfers, Arnold Palmer always took the time to sign autographs, pose for a picture, or chat with the crowds. His legion of followers became so devoted that Johnny Hendricks of the Augusta Chronicle named them Arnie's Army. Soon the fans took up that name themselves, cheering his victories and commiserating with his defeats. Palmer's swing was the opposite of Ben Hogan's mechanical perfection. He was aggressive, charismatic, and totally in love with the game. He never played for safety, choosing instead to hitch up his pants and charge down the fairway. The television camera loved his powerful drives, his expression-filled face, his youthful exuberance, and his proud march from tee to green.
Arnold Palmer reminds me a lot about Hagen. He's all over the place and he comes up with par. Every time I see him, I think it's young Hagen.
The 1960 Masters tournament again pitted him against Ken Venturi in the final round. Only this time, Palmer was down by a stroke with only 2 holes left to play. Yet another Palmer charge racked up a pair of birdies on the 17th and 18th and won him his second green jacket. Then it was on to Denver for the 1960 U.S. Open. This time, Palmer was a full 7 strokes behind going into the final 18.
We were having lunch, and Arnold, had just made 5 birdies and shot 1 over par. See, that's the part of the story nobody remembers. And when you make 5 birdies and you shoot 1 over par on a golf course that doesn't yield many birdies, you don't have a chance to do anything. So I was shaking my head, trying to figure out some way to get him stirred up. And he said, what would 65 do? And I looked at him, I said, it won't do you any good. I said, you had all your birdies this morning. He said, well, it won't. He said, 65 is 280, and 280 wins Opens. And he went out and shot 65.
His 30 on the front 9 and par 35 on the back 9 gave him the 65 that he had needed to take the national title. Another memorable moment of the match came when 1958 Open champion Tommy Bolt displayed his infamous temper. Furious that a water hazard had swallowed 2 of his shots, Bolt decided to teach it a lesson by hurling his favorite driver into the lake. A young boy from the gallery quickly dove into the water to retrieve the club. When a grateful Tommy Bolt approached the boy to thank him for his efforts, the soggy youth dashed through the crowd and disappeared over a fence with his newfound prize. Bolt stood there stunned while the gallery cheered the boy as he ran. In 1960, Arnold Palmer became only the 3rd man to win the Masters and the National Open in the same year. He was also top money winner with more than $75,000 on the tour. In 1963, he became the first golfer to win more than $100,000 in prize money over a single season. It had been 100 years since the first British Open. Yet the championship was in danger of losing its status as a major tournament in the modern golf scene. The British Championship offered a purse less than most minor tournaments on the American circuit. Most American golfers felt it wasn't worth the time and expense to cross the Atlantic. Without the best players, the British Open was rapidly fading to second-class status.
Arnold was the person who revitalized the British Open in some ways. After the war, the Americans didn't really come to the British Open until Arnold started coming. they came. Snead came and won the first Open after the war. Hogan came and won the Open at Carnoustie. But then Arnold Palmer was the first one to start coming continuously, and that was from 1960 onwards. And because he came, the other Americans came as well, and that gave the Open a tremendous lift.
Palmer came in second that year to Australian Kel Nagle, missing an opportunity to duplicate Ben Hogan's Triple Crown sweep by just one stroke. In 1961, Palmer succeeded in taking the British crown as a record gallery cheered from the sidelines. He successfully defended the title in 1962 by defeating Nagle with a new Open record of 276. It seemed the British fans couldn't be happier. The brash boy from Latrobe, Pennsylvania had become an international hero. In 1968, Arnold Palmer became the first golfer to exceed $1 million in career earnings. Yet that would be only the beginning. Years earlier, he had met Mark McCormick, who would help Palmer set the standard for a new breed of entrepreneurial sportsmen, where the winning check was only part of the game.
I first saw and met Arnold Palmer back in the early 50s when I was at William & Mary and he was at Wake Forest, and our teams played against each other. I didn't play him that day, but I watched him hit some balls and I met him. And when I began practicing law in Cleveland, Ohio in the very late 50s, you know, I had the idea that a lot of country clubs around the country didn't want to tie up their golf course during the season for a week to have a tournament, but that most clubs, no matter how exclusive they were, wanted to have an exhibition with a leading pro so that they could say to their guests when they were, a member could say to his guests, you know, Sam Snead was here last week and they drove it up by that tree, or so-and-so he got it on here in 2 with a drive and a 7-iron. I think everybody likes that. So I thought to myself that, gee, a lot of the golf pros would like to play exhibitions, a lot of the country clubs would like to have them, and nobody was trying to put those two together. So I asked a lot of the players, of whom Arnold was one, whether I could do a mailing and try to solicit exhibitions for them. Right about then, it was now early 1960, and Arnold, who was one of those original players, said, look, I'd like you maybe to just take over all of my affairs and help me answer my mail and do my taxes and investments and insurance and estate planning and contracts and the whole thing. And so that's what we did, and that started in 1960.
The sport's increased visibility on television in 1960, combined with McCormick's business sense and Palmer's worldwide popularity, dramatically increased the value of product endorsements for professional golfers. Arnold Palmer earned his 3rd Masters victory in 1962 and another in 1964. He became the first golfer to win 4 Masters jackets. Along with his 2 British Open victories and his U.S. Open and U.S. Amateur titles, Palmer claimed 8 majors and would go on to win a total of 61 tour victories. By the mid-60s, the reign of Arnold Palmer would confront new challenges. The King of the Links would face the tenacious onslaught of a determined South African and a Golden Bear.